There we go. Okay. So today we're going to talk about advanced safety planning, and we love these beautiful brochures. Look, this one is like created from Texas Advocacy Project. Like I said earlier, Texas Advocacy Project is a nonprofit law firm, and we're based here in Austin, but we serve the entire state of Texas. So we are really specific to only serving victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. And we're helping survivors access their legal options, understand what their legal rights are. And so maybe that is a survivor who is in an abusive relationship and they're not sure if they're ready to leave, but they've been told that if they ever try to leave, that they're going to get their kids taken away, or they're going to be deported, or anything along these lines. And so we want for those survivors to give us a call. From the time that a survivor calls our legal line or fills out an application online, we have an online portal for people to request an appointment to speak with an attorney. It's like less than 24 hours that they're able to speak with an attorney. We're open Monday through Friday from 8:30 until 5:30. And so our attorneys are able to get back with survivors super quick. And so that is really, really, really helpful. If you as an advocate are working in a program and you have an especially scary case and you really need that survivor to speak with an attorney the same day, then you guys, I'm going to give you my information at the end of this presentation. You can shoot me an email or give me a call, and we'll try to get that person to speak with an attorney the same day if needed. So last year in Texas, we were able to close over 5,000 cases. And that affected 13,000 Texans. And so and we have 13 attorneys on staff. So we're able to do a lot of work with not a lot of people. And a lot of that is because we're able to just answer legal questions on our legal line. So if you have questions, more questions about Texas Advocacy Project, I'd love to be able to answer those for you. We can send you guys some additional information on that. But let's jump into safety planning, because that's why everybody came here today. So this beautiful brochure, we send these out, we put them in backpacks and handbags as we send them out for Backpacks for Hope and our Handbags for Hope campaigns, and they're wonderful, right? Here's the problem. If we're working with survivors who live in homes where there is violence, and I give a survivor this brochure, she's probably, or he's probably going to throw this away, because it would tip off an abuser that they're in the process of trying to leave. And so even though they're really great, we really want to kind of look outside of this just basic level safety planning that we've been doing with survivors for so long. So when we think of safety planning, just in general, we've been taught this from a very young age, right? So lots of different scenarios. So I'm going to pause for a second. I'm going to let y'all type into that chat box. What are some scenarios that you can think of outside of the realm of domestic violence or sexual assault that you have safety planned through, or maybe that you safety plan with your children or children's through? I'm going to give y'all a couple of minutes, couple of seconds. Minutes are a long time on a webinar. They're precious minutes. So I'll give y'all home. Yay! Yes, getting separated in public. Oh, that's a great one. Yes, thank you, Lynn. Tornadoes. Yeah, Amy, I'm sure that you're probably somewhere right in that tornado alley. So these are all really, really great examples. Y'all can keep writing them in if you want to. I may end up changing some of my material here. Oh, hold on. What did somebody say? I used to have an app. Oh, there's an app for that, guys, to save files with the client, to record her information and take pics of things that she might need to grab and go. Oh, that's awesome, Eric. Okay, so here's the thing. Earthquakes, don't talk to strangers, parent pickup, traveling out of the country. Yes, these are all amazing. Look, some of y'all even said the stuff that are on this slide right here. So when we have safety planned throughout our life, fire drills, stranger danger, when you get your driver's license, checking the back seat. I had Wonderful teacher, bless her heart. But in high school, I was a sophomore. So, you know, sophomore, you're around getting to be 16 or you're already 16. And we had this teacher who was just trying to get us all prepared as we got our driver's license. And she had told us this horror story of this young girl who was going to pump her gas, and while she was pumping her gas, the boogeyman jumped in the backseat of her car, and then like held her hostage. And I'm sure that y'all have heard some type of story very similar to this, right? And so I promise you, I still will check the backseat of my car at the age of 33 years old because of that one story that teacher had told me that long ago, right? And so as we're talking about safety planning, it's really important that we help survivors understand, hey, look, you've been safety planning for a really long time. So let's think about it in that context, right? Think about people who are online dating now. I did online dating for a while before me and my husband got married, and my best friend is in the process of online dating right now. So she's like, hey, this is his name. He's gonna come pick me up. This is the kind of car that he drives. I'll text you. Like we have a safe word. She'll text me if everything's going good, or we have like a word that she'll text me if like she needs me to call her and help rescue her from that date, right? So things like that. And all of this is done preemptively. We're thinking about it. We're thinking through it before anything bad would ever happen. God forbid that would happen, right? We want for survivors to take that idea, and we as advocates really need to help them get to that place where they're creating their own safety plans. Okay. When I click on the little chat box, then I have to click back in here. So there we go. Okay, so this really awesome slide is just reiterating what I just told you. So what is a safety plan, or what is safety planning? It is an individualized plan that victims or survivors develop to reduce the risk they and their children face. So you're gonna see big bold letters on your computer screen or on your phone. And if you don't see them, I will tell them to you right now if you're just listening in. So individualized, victim, survivor, reduce the risk, right? That is our whole goal of safety planning, is to be able to help survivors create their own plans. We as advocates are just helping that process along. We're helping them think through all of the different scenarios, right? Okay, so here's the big pieces. So safety plans are fluid. They're going to change. When we have a survivor calling into our legal line, our safety plans look very different from the first time that we're speaking to a survivor. Maybe we're then helping that survivor access the criminal justice system. Maybe they're wanting to get a protective order, or they need help modifying their agreed orders or their child custody agreements or anything like that, right? Maybe we're helping them do that. So we're going to be safety planning with them around accessing the court. Then maybe we're helping them access safety after they've gotten a final order, right? And so our safety plans are always changing. Well, what happens if you, as an advocate who's working in a program, this may be the only time that you work with a survivor? Don't you want for that conversation to be so impactful that they will then think about their safety differently? Okay, so this is not a quote from me. I did not write this. If I was standing in front of you and doing this training, I would have a mic and I would mic drop it after saying this statement, because there's nothing else that needs to be said. Just kidding. But safety plans require advocates to participate in an active, dynamic, and culturally responsive information and resource sharing process that creates and improves options for each victim. I mean, whoever wrote that, thank you so much. I'll clap my hands to you. This is so great. So this is really what it is. This is what the whole presentation is about. How do we do this? How do we participate in active, dynamic, and culturally responsive processes that will create safety and help create ongoing safety for survivors? Okay, if you have worked in this field for any length of time, you have probably seen some version of this personalized safety plan. It may be called domestic violence personalized safety plan. It may be called relationship safety plan. It may be called a lot of different things, right? It may have your logo slapped on the top of it. It's probably about 12 pages long, maybe 6 pages front and back. And so this was what we used to use as I was working in the shelter. We would have that, 32 different pages that we had to go through with a survivor, and they had to sign them, and we had to ask all of their different types of victimizations. And then we had this one packet of paper, and we would hand it to the survivor, and then we would say, at your next meeting, we're going to go through this safety plan with you, right? And then we would also either pull this back out or give them another version of this once a survivor was exiting shelter, right? I don't know if any of y'all are doing that, or if you remember what these are or look like. And again, these are really great tools to kind of help a survivor think through and fill in the blank, right? Where is this 12 or 6 page or however long it is in your program packet of information going? It's probably going in the trash can, right? It's probably going in the trash can if they're going back home. It's getting buried in the 32 other pieces of paperwork that we're giving survivors, right? And so again, we're going to take the context of safety planning outside of this personalized safety plan. So let's start with Maslow's hierarchy of need. I did not create this beautiful version. Hold on a second. Let me make sure that this goes away. There we go. Okay. This version of Maslow's hierarchy of need, Maslow created this. Isn't that amazing? So Maslow was a psychologist from a long time ago, and he really looked at how do we create or get to a self-actualization, right? Well, what I'm really looking at in this Maslow's hierarchy of need and helping you as advocates really think about is when we're working with survivors, we really need to make sure that before we ever talk about safety and security and all of those amazing things, that their basic needs are being met, that a survivor's basic needs are being met. So water, sleep, food, formula for their baby, diapers for their baby, wipes for their baby, gas in their car to get to safety. These are all things that we need to make sure that we are thinking about before we talk about safety. Because if I am a survivor and I am in crisis and I've suffered from lots of trauma, when you are trying to safety plan with me on the phone, I'm not listening to really anything that you're saying, because all I'm thinking about is how hungry I am or how exhausted I am because I've been suffering from this abuse for so long and I just need a bed to sleep in, or I just need somebody to help me solve my problems, right? So I really want for you to start thinking about that. Inevitably, I usually get somebody who will tell me, what if, like, this is so pretty, but can you take out the homeostasis, excretion, sex from the physiological needs? And I can't do that because I'm not Maslow, and so I can't do that. But I really want for you to, as I don't want that to take away from when we're talking to survivors and we're really helping them to break these cycles of violence and get safe and stay safe in their situations, that we need to work collaboratively so that we can serve the survivors' basic needs, and then we can help them safety plan. So safety plan should account for whether a victim chooses to leave, stay, or remain in contact. Jill Davies is an amazing advocate in this work. I love her. I have links to her books, and that is her newest book, which is not new anymore. It's like 5 years old at this point. But she took safety planning with survivors and she said, what do we do when we have survivors who are in lifelong relationships? They may never leave those relationships, right? So let's talk about for a second, and I want for y'all to write into that chat box, why might a survivor remain in contact with an abuser? Children, finances, great, fear, yes, love. Oh, hey, Leticia, how are you? Oh, Letty, I haven't heard from you in so long. Yes, housing. Oh, look, y'all, I have goosebumps. Y'all are such great advocates already. So there are a lot of reasons why a survivor may remain in contact, right? The number one reason is definitely going to be children. And so I have worked, and I'm sure that some of y'all have worked with survivors in the past who say, I'm gonna leave my abuser and I never wanna hear from them or talk to them ever again. And so as we're creating these safety plans, we have to be real, right? We have to sometimes be the real voice in that survivor's life and say, you know, that might be really difficult because you share children and your abuser still has access to your children. So let's think of a plan where it limits your contact and keeps you safe. But maybe there are a lot of different apps. Our attorneys have some suggestions for really amazing apps when people are getting a divorce or when they are in the middle of divorce proceedings and child custody agreements. That allows for you to have safe communication that's also documented in case we ever need to bring that up in court, right? For when an abuser and a survivor may need to remain in contact. So there are a lot of reasons why survivors may remain in contact with their abuser. And we really want to make sure that our safety plans take those things into account. Okay. So when I mentioned earlier, culturally responsive safety planning, we need to understand that safety planning is not some cookie cutter response that we do with every single survivor, and it's going to fit every single survivor story the same. They are unique, they change all the time. And so here are just some different situational safety planning examples. So accessing courts like we just talked about, child support, safety during a violent situation, military members. We work a lot with the military. We just went and did a training with the military. They can get complicated because there's lots of systems involved, right? Teens, disabled or elderly survivors, children, emotional safety planning. That's one that we often forget about is the emotional safety planning, and I want to make sure that we do touch on that today. What if the police officer is the abuser, undocumented? That is a specifically hard one for us right now in the climate that we're in. Technology, rural, LGBTQIA, all of the different circumstances. If there is one on here that you are like, this is the whole reason why I signed up for this webinar, because I really want some good tips that I can take away about this specific scenario, please write those into the chat box, because I want to make sure that we save time at the end of this presentation to really go through some different situational stuff. But as you guys are doing that, I don't want to have any dead air time, so let's just talk about really quickly some different ways that I may safety plan with survivors. So let me give you a couple of examples of cases that I'm working right now. So one, I had one of our attorneys, I was in the office last week before going to a national conference, and I had an attorney run down the hall to my office and say that the attorney that she shares an office with was on the phone with a survivor who I needed a safety plan with. And she wanted to make sure that I did it right then and went to that survivor's office because because she didn't know if we would ever hear from her again. And so I went in there and I started asking the survivor a bunch of questions. And so with this survivor particularly, she'd been with this abuser for 12 years. He's in the military. He was in the military. He's since retired. There's been lots of different types of abuse. I had to ask her very specific questions because she originally said that there was not any sexual abuse. And so I asked her really specific questions about sexual violence. And then we discovered that she had a bunch of sexual abuse in that relationship, strangulation, lots and lots and lots of different things, right? So when I'm on the phone with her, I can see this clear escalation in violence over the past 3 months. And there was a triggering event that happened in those last 3 months. This abuser had lost his job. He was previous military, had served over 7 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan in war zones in combat. He had suffered from PTSD. He was not receiving any medical help about his mental state. And so but he is very particular in where he would leave marks, and he would never leave marks anywhere where anybody would see it. So they go to church every single Sunday, and they went to church, and after church let out, he grabbed her arm and hit her in the face. And he'd never done anything like that in public before. And this is the whole, and it was in front of their son. And so this is the whole reason that she decided to call us and decided to get out of that situation, because she knew that there was an escalation. She had seen that there was an escalation. He had put video cameras all around her home so that he could see when she was leaving and when she was coming. So for her to be able to get any items actually out of the house little by little was impossible. And so every day she went to the gym at the same exact time. So what she was doing, she was taking a duffel bag. This woman was so smart in how she like had manipulated the situation. But she and I use manipulated in a very positive terms in this scenario, right? These are survivors that we're talking about. So they've learned how to survive. And so she would take her duffel bag, her gym bag every single day, and she would put little things in there, her son's toys, paperwork, little things that he wouldn't know were missing. And then she'd put it in her locker at the gym so that it would stay there safe for whenever she decided to leave. And so that's just a snippet of this scenario, but I just kind of want you to see how complex every scenario is as we're talking about it with survivors. So I saw some of you write in some really great scenarios that you'd love for us to talk about, so I'm going to make sure that we save time at the end of this presentation to discuss LGBTQ, violations of protective orders when they're not taken seriously by law enforcement, emotional safety planning, especially around sexual assault, yes, children or that was for the other one, sorry, Jackie. So yeah, I will make sure to save time for all of these at the end of the presentation as well. Feel free if you have any good tips though in the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, feel free to type those in, things that you've been able to see that work really well in safety planning. Okay, so we love wheels in this movement, right guys? We make wheels for everything. So I have creatively made a wheel for safety planning. Isn't that something? So we're gonna start with helping survivors evaluate their risks. And then we're going to consider the wide range of options that are available for survivors as they're trying to access safety. And then we're gonna move into identifying steps that survivors need to reduce those risks, implementing these strategies, and then let's review them. Do they work? For those survivors who say, I never want to have any communication with my abuser ever again, and if that's what the survivor wants, that's what the survivor, this is the survivor's plan, right? But let's review that and adapt it as needed, right? And so it allows for us to have these continued conversations with survivors as we are really working these fluid plans into place. All right, so let's start with risk assessment, risk evaluation. There are a lot of different assessment tools used out there. Some of them are really amazing. The one that I tend to really lean into is going to be Jacqueline Campbell's danger assessment. So I'll talk about that in the next slide. But we really do need to understand, especially for those survivors who are in intimate partner violence relationships, where there may be some sexual assault that's happening, that we understand that leaving is a really high risk decision. And so our safety planning needs to take into account risk or danger assessments. We also need to ask questions about if an abuser has access to a gun or a firearm or an ammunition. What we know nationally, this is a national statistic that came out a couple of years ago, is that the presence of a gun in domestic violence situations increases the risk of homicide for women by 500%. That is huge, right? Just the presence of a gun. We really need to make sure that the wording that we use with survivors reflects that. What if a survivor has a gun, right? The abuser doesn't have a gun, but the survivor has a gun. I've seen a lot of situations where this is played out. The Texas Council on Family Violence does an amazing job every single year of gathering data from femicide victims, so female homicide victims in Texas. They've been doing this literally forever. When I used to work at TCFV, the Texas Council on Family Violence, I actually saw the archives of the first versions of these, where the advocates who worked for TCFV at the time would literally just take little like notebook pages, and it was called the Grin Tally Report, and they would call each shelter and they would say, did you have any people who were murdered in your community this past year? Like, it was so, like, and I've seen the tally marks, it was horrible. So it used to be called the Grin Tally Report, then it turned into the Women's Killed List, and now it is honoring Texas victims. And so you kind of see this progression of how we look at these femicide victims here in Texas. And so what we know is that 65% of the perpetrators who murdered their partner used a firearm. That is huge, right? And here's all of the other means. So 15% stabbed, 9% strangled, physical assault. This is huge, right? When we also talk about who's the highest county, we see Harris County is the highest county. There's a lot of different reasons for why that happens, but also we need to understand that this is per capita. Harris County has had the highest number of femicides for a very long time. And I know amazing advocates that are working in those communities try to help bring those numbers down and bring awareness around this issue and safety to these survivors. And so I'm hoping if you are from Harris County, you can take some amazing tips with you back to your community. So the decision to leave could mean an escalation in the partner's violence, an increased risk for children, a loss of the victim's home, job, income, health insurance, immigration status, a loss of their faith community, and even support of family and friends. Listen, guys, I'm preaching to the choir here. We know this. We know as we're working with survivors that these are all real reasons why survivors and why victims stay in relationships, right? And so let's try to help break down some of those barriers. Also, when we talk about leaving not equaling safety, 37% of the women who were killed had made attempts or were planning to end their relationship, and 70% of those female homicides happened within a victim's home. And so we know that this is the most dangerous time for survivors. So I'm going to read this. So women seldom overestimate danger, but they do underestimate danger. And so this is when you are working with a survivor and they say, you know, he said that he'd kill me, but I just really don't think that he ever would actually do that, right? These might be words that you've heard from survivors say in the past. And so listen, we call them survivors for a reason. They are surviving these horrible relationships, right? And so they, as a means of survival, they will underestimate the capability that their partner has. And so we want to be able to build trust and have conversations with survivors where we may be the reality checkpoint for them. And in terms of doing that, we do this risk assessment or these danger assessments. So we need to evaluate those risks, right? So here's that danger assessment. You can access this at dangerassessment.com. You do have to pay for the training from them, but they have the entire 20 questions on their website, right? So here's kind of like the quick and dirty of the danger assessment tool is Jacqueline Campbell, who's a researcher out of Johns Hopkins University, had gotten together with a group of people. So all different types of first responders, EMTs, law enforcement, advocates, former survivors, all different types of people to come up with this weighted tool, and it's a 2-part tool. And so the first part is 20 questions, and here's just a snippet of some of those questions. Has the physical violence increased in severity or frequency over the past year? Does the abuser own a gun? Have you left him or her living together during the past year? If so, what did that look like? Are they unemployed? Did they recently lose a job, right? Have they ever used a weapon against you? These are just things for us to think about, right? The second part of this danger assessment tool is a calendar, and it says, how many times in the last 30 days did any of these types of abuse happen? And what you're doing is you're weighting that tool to see what is this victim's level of potential fatality or increased danger for fatality. And so this is a great tool. Here's the criticisms of it, that it's not 100% accurate, that there are a lot of survivors who score really low on this who are still at an increased risk for danger. We can never predict somebody's behavior, especially abusers. They are very unpredictable, right? So these are really great tools. They are not the one all be all. There's lots of different tools of them. Here's what we're looking at. histories of violence, violations of protective orders, access to firearms, use of weapons. The big ones that I'm looking for are going to be alcohol and drug abuse, violations of protective orders, long histories of abuse or of assaults. I'm also going to be looking at, I think I said strangulation and stalking and sexual violence. These are all really big points when I'm talking to a survivor if I start seeing this. Also, if I see a really clear escalation in violence, then I'm going to have some conversations with that survivor, right? Okay, so now let's help those survivors think of different options that might be available to them. And this is where that resource sharing part of that conversation comes into play. We as advocates have an amazing opportunity through the trainings that we attend, through the people that we get to know, this webinar that you're listening to today, right? Like, I hope that if out of nothing else that you get from this, and I hope that you get amazing things from it, that you know that Texas Advocacy Project is a resource for your survivors, that they can reach out to and have a real life attorney contact them back within less than 24 hours. How amazing is that? How life-saving can that be and life-changing can that be for a survivor? So we want for survivors to think of unconventional community resources. Here's again where I would love your input, and I would love for you to be able to write into that chat feature right there in that box and tell me what are some unconventional community resources that you as advocates have used with survivors in your communities. And don't be afraid to share those and then think that people are going to steal that, because what happens if somebody in a different community has that same type of organization, and they could then reach out and say, like, listen to what this other amazing group did, it's so great, and then that opens up a whole new resource for other survivors. So unconventional victim assistance support groups, great, Kathy, that's great. I'm going to give you a really awesome example. So I have done this presentation many times. I presented on this same topic at the Crimes Against Women's Conference 4 years ago. Literally flew in the 2 days after I got married to come and present on this topic. So that was super fun. And I always learn from advocates, and this amazing person in my audience had told this really great story, so I'm going to share it with y'all. So she was working with a survivor who had suffered from lots of physical and emotional abuse and lots of financial abuse. So she was unable to, she didn't have any access to funds in their house or the accounts in the house. And she also did not have any children. And so it was this woman, and her abuser was her husband. And so the only time that this victim was able to leave her house without her abuser being tipped off or thinking anything was going on was to her knitting group. So she would go with this group of women and they would knit. And she never opened up about this abuse with anybody in her knitting group. And then finally, she really wanted to leave. And so she opened up to her group about what was going on, and she told them that, you know, she didn't have any money saved and she really needed to get out and go to a safe place. And this knitting group got together and they knit, I guess, a bunch of things and had a fundraiser. So they sold all of the things that they made, and then they gave that money to the survivor to be able to put a deposit down on an apartment so that she could get out of that abusive relationship. I'm like, chill bumps, right, guys? Amazing. What an amazing unconventional resource. So as we're working with survivors, we need to ask, who is a resource to you? What have you tried? What's worked? What hasn't worked? You know, a lot of the times, a lot of the survivors that we serve have already, you know, relied on family or relied on friends for a long time, and those people may have cut them off, or they may have decided that they don't want to help that survivor anymore. And so for a lot of times, for a lot of people, family and friends aren't a support system that they can look into. Okay, so unconventional resource, having a survivor stay in the waiting area of the hospital overnight when there is no shelter available or safe place. Yeah, hey Letty, that's you. I think that is one option, but what about the shelters? Do they have any private funds that allow for that survivor to go and get in a hotel room, right? Or do we have law enforcement officers even who are in a different county? So we had to get really creative when I was working in rural Texas, right? Where when I was working in Huntsville and in Livingston, and we had a shelter in both of those locations. And so we would have a survivor who needed shelter who lived in Huntsville, but we didn't have any space. And so then we would get the law enforcement officers to take them and drive them to that county line in Livingston. The Livingston Police Department would come and pick them up and take them to the shelter in Livingston. So just a different way of for us to be able to provide those county to county transfers. So just one way, and sometimes clients don't want to leave Houston. Totally understandable. So yeah, what would be maybe a different community resource, right? Like outside of them, like that's so sad for me that people have to stay in the waiting room of a hospital, but I get that has to happen, right? So, and for Harris County, that's a huge area. So let's just, try to think and help to survivors think through that process for sure. Okay. So moving on, let's see. So considering the wide range of options. Okay, the next few slides, we're gonna talk about some like real tangible steps to reduce the risk. But look, y'all, you see this like first bullet point here that says disclaimer. I work for a law firm, so I have to tell you, all of my presentations are reviewed by our legal director so that she makes sure that they're A, all accurate, and B, that we wouldn't get sued for anything, right? That's what attorneys do best. And me as the advocate, I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna put everything in here. So this was actually, I borrowed this from a different website. After this presentation, you'll get all my notes and you'll see where I got this from. But in one of the websites, it said like keep a small can of pepper spray or even wasp spray near. So this is where I tell you that if you are giving this tip to a survivor who's in an abusive relationship, that wasp spray does and can cause blindness. Okay, so there's my disclaimer. If that ever happens and you tell a survivor this tip and their abuser is coming after them and assaulting them and they use it and then their abuser goes blind, that they can't sue Texas Advocacy Project because we've given you this tip, right? But also like karma, let's not abuse people. So there's my little tip for that. But here's the reality. Do most survivors have access or have pepper spray? No, right? The abuser is most of the time, if they're still in those abusive relationships, not going to allow for a victim to have pepper spray. So wasp spray may be a creative idea for that. Moving on to the next one would be like replace wood doors with steel ones. But look, guys, that's really expensive and a lot of survivors don't have access to funds to be able to do that. Identify transportation limitations. Where do you live? I went and did a training up in the panhandle of Texas, and they were saying like they have one taxi service, and that taxi service takes like an hour to even like go and provide the taxi service. So like do you have ride sharing options? Do you have public transportation? If you are an advocacy organization and you have public transportation, do you have like vouchers or do you have like tokens for survivors to be able to access the public transportation system? So just helping, again, to break down some of those barriers. If possible, leave home when the abuser is intoxicated. Listen, this is not in any way, shape, or form meant to say that alcohol or drugs causes domestic violence or sexual assault, but what we do know is that in abusive relationships, it can intensify it, right? And so as survivors are looking into their safety and what that looks like, they may see a pattern, right? That Friday nights, the abuser gets drunk, and then when he comes home from the bar, he's mad about something and he takes it out on the victim, right? So just what would that look like? Could a survivor say, hey, I'm gonna go stay the night at my sister's house before there's ever been an abusive incident, to kind of help create safety around that? Keeping a charged cell phone with GPS disabled and location services turned off near at all times. Well, that was a little hard one for me to say, sorry guys. So There's an entire presentation that we do separate from this one that talks about tech safety, and TCFB also has a really amazing tech safety training as well. So the quick and dirty of that is, listen, if you turn off your location services on your phone, is that going to create more danger for the survivor? So we want to know that. 2, we also want to take into account any devices that children may have. So smartphones, tablets, gaming systems, all of those things have location services tied to them as well. And then we want, even if you turn your location services off on your phone, especially like if you have an Apple product, then even if you temporarily disable those location services, if the abuser knows a survivor's Apple ID and password, which if it's an abuser, they probably know all of this information about a victim, then they can temporarily restore those location services on a victim's device. And so just making sure that we understand tech and safety and all different types of the stuff that's involved in that. Okay, if reproductive coercion is being used, so maybe limiting somebody's use of birth control or lying about their use of birth control, keeping Plan B present. Listen, when I first started in this work, Plan B did not exist. And then when Plan B came around and it was like, hey, you have to go to a doctor, right? Or you have to go to a Planned Parenthood and be able to get it. And it was super expensive, right? And then now you can go to like HEB, right? If you're living in Texas, if you're outside of Texas and you're on this call, HEB is the best grocery store of all times, okay? And I'm sorry that you don't have them in your state, but here in Texas, we love HEB and they have them there. And so I went to our local HEB here in Austin and I said, hey, how much is Plan B? Because I just wanted to know if I ever am accessing that. Y'all, it costs $10. No insurance, $10. How amazing is that? Okay, sorry. I get like super amped up about these things because that used to be a barrier for a lot of survivors. And now a survivor, as they're going to the grocery store to do normal grocery shopping, they can be able to do that. I know, Letty, right? I'm telling you, we've come a long way. And P.S., that Pamela, that's at HEB. They also sell it at Walmart. I've seen it at Target over the counter. At HEB, you actually have to go up to the pharmacist and ask for it, but you don't have to provide any type of documentation or anything. It just have to ask for it. I have asked all of these questions so that I could make sure that I gave them y'all the most recent information. Erase all search history of accessing information about leaving. Oh, Kathy, can you get Plan B on Amazon? I don't think so. But there is a new like service app, and I'm so sorry, guys. I had it open on my, and I meant to take a picture of it. I will send it out in the notes. But there is a new app that you can download, and it's so that you can get low cost or no cost birth control without ever having to go and see a doctor, because they have doctors that you like fill out this quick survey online, and it takes 3 minutes for you to be able to do that. I did it before I came in here, and I have insurance, thankfully, so my birth control doesn't cost anything. But if you don't have insurance, you can get birth control pill or all different types. I mean, they had everything. They had all the different types of birth control for like $15 a month. And part of that also was the Plan B. You can get Plan B if you need it too through this app. I promise you, I will link it in our resources after this presentation because it'll be a really great resource for us to be able to give to survivors where reproductive coercion is part of their relationship. Okay. More suggestions continued. Safety planning, coming up with code words, especially with children. I know this is a hard one for a lot of people because we say like, oh no, the children never see it. And the reality is that 90% of the time, or 90% of the situations that the children know that something's going on. They've either seen it or they've heard it, they know what's happening. And so we just want to be real with survivors that their children need to be a part of these safety plans. The last thing that I want to hear is a 911 call from a child saying that their parent is being harmed or killed by their other parent. So Single story, what floor do you live on? Are you in an apartment? Again, remember guys, the fire safety plans that we used to do. Listen, I grew up in a really rural town, and my parents live on a ranch, and so my dad, he's a very amazing man, but he would say like, hey, let's do a fire drill in our house. So what would happen? What would you do? And, you know, we would go through things like touch the doorknob, look for smoke. We all had windows in each of our bedrooms, and we lived in a single story. And my dad said, okay, so what's the first thing that you grab? And I said, my yearbook. Bless my 13-year-old heart that we never want to tell a victim to grab their yearbook, right? But just, again, helping people think through this. What does that look like as they're trying to exit their home if there's an abusive situation happening? Listing each weapon in the house and knowing where they're located and if they've been moved. I have two really specific scenarios about that. So one, I was working with a survivor whose abuser like collected samurai swords and had an entire room in their house dedicated to that. That was located on the second story. So as we were safety planning, we said like, don't go into that room and don't be anywhere near that room if there's a physical altercation. The other one was about a survivor who, when I was in Huntsville, had accessed our services. Unfortunately, in Huntsville, at this time that I was there, like she had been in a shelter like 15 different times, right? Clear escalation of violence, all of these things. Her abuser had access to a gun, and every night before they would go to bed, he would put his gun on his bedside table, and the safety was off, and it had a bullet in the chamber. And she knew this. She always knew this. And so it was his unspoken way of creating fear in that house for her. One night she came to bed and the gun was not on the side table and he didn't take it off. And so she was like, hey, I'm going to go downstairs and get a glass of water. Do you need anything? He said no. She had been, like I said, in shelter 15 different times. So she like had an exit strategy of every different scenario. She had her purse on a hook by the door that had her keys in it. She had access to a vehicle as well. So she went downstairs instead of going to the kitchen to get water. She actually went and went straight to the police department, and she told them what was going on. They made a report. He actually had a protective order against him at the time, so they did a violation of a protective order. They were able to get a warrant issued. She ended up coming into shelter that evening. When they went to serve the warrant on him, they also had a search warrant, and they searched his car, and they found that he had like zip tie, trash bags, duct tape, like all of the makings that he had a plan that he was going to commit homicide that evening. And so, and he ended up actually confessing to that later on. So again, nothing horrible had happened that evening. They weren't even fighting. The only thing that triggered that for her is that she knew that that gun was not there anymore. So understanding that these survivors are the experts in their situations, right? Are smoke detectors current, and are they working? What do you notice about your partner's moods? How do they change before an abusive incident? Can you determine warning signs? Again, all of these questions that we're asking here really need to be asked after we've established trust with that survivor, right? We can do some quick safety planning if we're only on the phone with the survivor, but we really want to make sure that we have these ongoing extensive conversations, making sure that we have pets included in safety plans, even big pets. I worked with survivors before who were like, they did not want to leave because they had the survivor had a horse. There's an amazing resource here in Texas where they will like house your animals, your big farm animals, if you need help with that in order to get safe and stay safe. And also, like, I'll tell you, like, my mother-in-law, she like rescues horses from all over the state of Texas. So there are people who just like have land and like want for an animal to come and like chew their grass so they don't have to mow it. So that could be an option too. What are the safer areas or rooms in your home? So we've always said like avoid bathrooms, kitchens. Here's the reasons for that. Bathrooms, lots of hard surfaces, usually do not have an exit out of there. There's not usually a window in most bathrooms. Kitchens, because knives and other things. If you ever seen a Medea movie, she uses like a cast iron skillet. Rooms where weapons are located. Any rooms where there's no exit out of the house. Again, we're just thinking through, we're trying to eliminate risks for survivors, right? Okay, so now let's implement them and review them. So after we've created this whole safety plan with the survivor and we've said, okay, we've identified these risks, what works, what's not working. Do we need to change anything? Do we need to get creative? Do we need to bring in outside resources to help identify different risks that you might be facing now, right? So we really, we want to reevaluate these safety plans constantly. We want for survivors to be able to be so familiar with this process, like they are with their fire drills and their stranger danger and checking their kids' Halloween candy and, when they're traveling and all those things. We want for them to think about their safety in those terms. We don't want them to be in crisis when they are creating safety plans. We want for survivors to think about their safety, to think about their kids' safety, so that in case there were to be any other type of incidents that happen, that they just know how to respond, that it's second nature to them and what they need to do, that they've already been honest with their kids about what is the potential and what could happen, right? Like, we want for all of these to be the reality of the survivors that we work with. We need to constantly be thinking innovatively, y'all. My best resource is y'all in the work, in the movement, in the communities who, like Letty said, like, she's worked with the survivors who are in the hospital and they can't get into a shelter and they don't want to leave Houston. And so somebody had to ask, right? Like, somebody had to ask that hospital, can this survivor just sit here where there's a security guard in the hospital and they feel safe? Like, somebody had to ask that, right? Like, an advocate had to say that. So what does that look like for you in your communities? Who are the people that you're already attending coordinated response teams? So maybe it's your MDMT, maybe it's your CRT, maybe it's your any acronym that you can think of, right? Maybe it's your fatality review or your children fatality review, or maybe it's just your monthly like meetup coffee with the chief of police or something like that. What does that look like for you? Where can you start having these conversations where we try to break down barriers that survivors are facing so that we can be a part of that safety plan for them? Supporting the survivor's decisions. Y'all, there are so many times that I have like safety planned so amazing and I felt so good. I had safety planned it. I had put a beautiful red bow on the top of it and I was like, this survivor is safe forever. And guess what? That survivor decided to go home. That's okay. You know what? That survivor felt like they needed to go home, back to that situation. And I hope that something that I did in that one time or that 2 times that I talked to that survivor will enable them to be able to be safe, even in their homes if they decide to never leave, right? Here's some really great resources for y'all. The Building Comprehensive Solutions. These are links. I told you Jill Davies, oh my God, I'm such an advocate for her. She is an amazing woman. This is the book, Safety Planning with Battered Women. There's an updated version of that that I think came out like 5 years ago. I'm not totally sure. You can get that on Amazon for like 20 bucks. These are some of where I got a lot of the stuff and content for today's presentation on here. Okay, here are some apps. I'm gonna save time at the end. We've got like 6 minutes left. I'm gonna save some time at the end for us to be able to safety plan through some of those scenarios that you said. But this in your top left of your screen, the Tech Safety app. I just went to a conference with the National Network to End Domestic Violence. They're amazing humans doing amazing work. This is an app that they created that literally has every single type of technology, including fax machines, y'all, different types of technology, how to use them, how to safety plan around them, resources to give survivors. Super great, and it's free. It's called Tech Safety App. It's by NNEDV, National Network to End Domestic Violence, Tech Safety App. Okay, bottom left of your screen. Listen, again, I told y'all earlier, if you take nothing else away, take that like, we'll come, do some training, we'll serve your survivors, all of these really great things. The second thing that I hope that you take away is this app. It is also a free app. It is called My Plan, MYPLAN. It is an amazing tool for survivors. Listen, here's what we know. The largest group of people, the age group of people being abused by an intimate partner or who have been sexually assaulted is between the ages of 18 to 24. I actually think that stat just went up to 27. I'm not totally sure though. 18 to 24. What do 18 to 24-year-olds not want to do? They do not want to talk on the phone. They hate it. It gives them anxiety. Somebody calls them, they freak out, right? My plan, MYPLAN. I'll write it in the notes section here too. My plan. This is a 3-part tool. Y'all, they have asked every single question on here. They're like, what, are you in a same-sex relationship? Are you a college student? They ask, are you a child? They ask all kinds of stuff. And then they ask those 20 questions, that danger assessment, that Jacqueline Campbell's danger assessment. They have the second part of that tool on this app, and then they connect that survivor with resources and help them create an entire safety plan. Y'all, it is thebomb.com. My plan, MYPLAN. Another, really cool thing about this is that they have to log into it. Whoa. Oh God, hold on guys, sorry. I just pulled up everybody's name. So let me just write it in here really quick. Okay, there we go. These other 2 apps right here, these are like 911 apps. So they can live safe and, oh gosh, guys, I don't remember what the other one is. Safe Track, TRECK. Oh no, it looks like, let me pull it up on my phone really quick. It looks like a little leaf that's like turquoise and gray. So it's like it looks like a leaf and it's turquoise and gray on my phone. Sorry, I hope that is helpful. Okay, so Safe Track, Live Safe, these are 911 apps so that if a victim is ever in a situation, they can hold this down and it will send their exact GPS location to law enforcement. Woo, we got 2 minutes left, y'all. This is an 1.5-hour presentation. I just did an hour. So all of that to say, here is our legal line number, 800-374-HOPE. You have a survivor, you tell them to call us. We want to be able to serve you, your survivors, answer your questions that you might have for free, all the time. Doesn't matter what it looks like on paper that the survivor makes. It doesn't matter if they're undocumented. We want to serve all Texans, Okay, 800-374-HOPE. Here's my email address. Listen, I want to be y'all's resource. I want to be able to help you guys create safety plans, break down barriers for your survivors. You let me know how I can help you. I want to come to your community. I want to train y'all, train your people for free. So we've got like 2 minutes. I want to be really respectful of your guys' time. So at the beginning, I said, what are some different ways? Y'all said emotional safety planning was one of them. Oh my God, I'm going all the way back up to the top. Sorry, I want to make sure that we talk about this. Okay, emotional safety planning, and then let's just start with that one really quick. So for the emotional safety planning one, y'all, we know working with survivors, they have suffered from a lot of trauma, and we want to make sure that systematically that we are responding and we're being honest about the way that our criminal justice system responds to survivors, especially survivors of sexual assault. And so if that means us as an advocate, we're sitting there with them as they're filling out or as they're giving their account of what happened, I want to believe that every law enforcement officer is going to be able to take a report from a survivor of sexual assault and never blame that victim, right? Like that's our goal. We know that is not the case in a lot of different survivors areas and service areas. And so we want to make sure that if we hear of criminal justice systems blaming victims, that we can stop that right there and let survivors know that that's not okay. And that it's never a survivor's fault, right? And so the emotional safety planning, helping survivors understand failures and systematic response, helping them to be real about, is a protective order going to be the best thing? Also, like, what are triggers? Like years and years later, you may smell cologne that you go right back to that exact situation that you were in. You may see somebody who looks exactly like the person that assaulted you. You may, a song may come on the radio, right? How do we reduce our access or our exposure to the triggers that are going to be really detrimental to survivors? And how do we create space for survivors to access resources to help them address those triggers and healthy ways to deal with them? I'm sorry, guys, I only got to the emotional safety planning one and I just got to it. So Here's the deal. There was violations of protective orders not being taken seriously by law enforcement. Here's the way that you break down that barrier. Laura Wallace, if you're still on this call, you contact Texas Advocacy Project. We will help you in getting enforcement. We will send orders to that community that say you have to enforce this. We'll sue them if they don't actually enforce them, right? Those are like kind of big picture ideas and what to do. So LGBTQ, listen, let me see who said that. Diane King, I will reach out to me after this. Let's talk about LGBTQ survivors and how to safety plan around that. I want to be really respectful of people's time, and we're 2 minutes over. So thank you guys so much. If you have other questions that you guys have want answered, shoot me an email, write it into the chat box. I'll try to answer it. Please let me know if you guys have any questions. I'm so grateful for your time today that you took away to listen to this presentation. So thank you guys.
And Amanda, thank you so much for your time and getting so much information in so quickly. I appreciate it. And I just want to remind y'all that there will be, in about an hour, a follow-up email coming with an evaluation and then a link to your certificate of attendance for today. So please, please, please fill out the evaluation. If you like this webinar, and hopefully we can keep doing it all over again all the time. So thank you so much. Amanda, I'm guessing I'll see you tomorrow at TDCJ and at the Academy. And if not, we need to do lunch. For everybody else, it is lunchtime. So go enjoy your lunch. Thank you, Amanda. I'm going to sign off in a little bit.
All right. Thanks, guys.